History's most inbred woman killed 600 girls for beauty. 1. Prologue: The Legend of the Blood Countess. In the shadowed halls of Central Europe's ancient kingdoms, a name lingers like a chilling whisper carried on the night wind. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, a woman of immense power and nobility whose deeds blurred the line between history and legend, fact and myth. For centuries, whispered tales told of a countess so fixated on eternal youth that she bathed in the blood of hundreds, damning herself to a dark, macabre legacy. But who was Elizabeth really? Was she merely a monster painted by fear and political intrigue, or a tragic product of her time, twisted bloodlines, and the brutal patriarchal society she ruled within? This tale ventures beyond sensationalism, exploring the genetic inheritance, cultural obsessions, and psychological turmoil that enveloped one of history's most infamous women. Set against the backdrop of 16th and 17th century Hungary, a land of shifting allegiances, noble families vying for power, and a culture where blood was both treasure and curse, Elizabeth's story begins long before her infamous crimes. It winds through the halls of aristocratic marriage politics, genetic inheritance, and the deadly pursuit of beauty and control. 2. Noble bloodlines entwined. The genetic shadows. Elizabeth Bathory was born in 1560 into a world deeply obsessed with lineage and purity of blood. Her family was one of the most powerful and ancient in Hungary, a lineage stretching back centuries, intertwined repeatedly through marriages between relatives. The Bathory family, alongside other aristocratic houses like the Habsburgs, practiced consanguineous marriages, unions between blood relatives designed to keep wealth and power tightly controlled within the family. Such marriages were a double-edged sword. While they guarded property and titles from outsiders, they also quietly invited a genetic reckoning. With each generation of close-kin marriages, the probability of recessive genetic disorders increased. These disorders could manifest as physical deformities, cognitive impairments, or behavioral issues, hidden like dark stains beneath the surface splendor of noble portraits. Elizabeth's own family history bore the marks of such inbreeding. Many relatives suffered from ill health and frailty. Some rumors whispered of madness in distant ancestors, though such talk was carefully suppressed in public. Yet the threads of her bloodline wove a tapestry of vulnerability beneath the diamond-studded crowns. Her parents, Anna Bathory and George VI Bathory, were themselves close kin from powerful branches of the family. Their union was more than a joining of two souls. It was a strategic alliance aimed at consolidating influence during tumultuous times marked by Ottoman encroachment and noble rivalries. From her earliest days, Elizabeth was shaped by expectations that bore the weight of centuries: to be a flawless heiress, a conduit to the future of the Bathory legacy. This obsession with bloodline purity was paradoxically the very birthplace of her family's greatest tragedies. While the science of heredity and genetics would not emerge for centuries, the consequences were etched deeply into the lives and bodies of the aristocracy. Unseen genes twisted destinies behind elaborate court ceremonies and sumptuous feasts. This is the first installment of the script. If you want, I will proceed with the next part soon, covering Elizabeth's childhood marriage and the cultural obsession with beauty that would crown her dark path. 3. A childhood marked by power and isolation, and enduring. Elizabeth's earliest memories were steeped in grandeur, tinged with unease. Her family's fortified castles stood as bulwarks against both Ottoman invaders and restless neighbors, symbols of pride built atop centuries of ambition and suspicion. She lived in a rarefied world. Servants everywhere, silver on every table, and yet the air was thick with the silent expectation that she would embody everything the Bathory blood demanded. From infancy, signs of privilege were matched by hints of deep-seated tension. Elizabeth suffered frequent migraine attacks and severe epileptic fits, what the era called the falling sickness, episodes often attributed in noble circles to either divine punishment or ancestral degeneration. Her health, delicate and unpredictable, became a topic carefully skirted by court physicians who prescribed poultices and incantations, but never solutions. The family's tendency to marry close kin meant that Elizabeth's parents themselves were genetic mirrors, their union nearly as much a gamble as a guarantee of the family's power. Rumors circulated of peculiar traits, odd behavior, flashes of violence, extreme melancholy that haunted various Bathory kin. Elizabeth's education was more rigorous than most girls of her era. She learned Latin, Greek, and German, mastering mathematics and philosophy, yet her world extended little beyond castle walls. Socialization, when it came, was primarily with cousins and siblings, children whose features and tempers all strangely resembled her own. Her mother, Anna, was a woman of iron, her ambitions for her daughter stoked by the twin fires of vanity and fear. She taught Elizabeth the importance of beauty as currency, of poise as power. Yet beneath these lessons, the family's dark tales lurked. The fate of mad uncles, the tragedies of aunts confined for hysteria, stories kept secret from prying ears, but evident in every anxious glance exchanged over supper. Elizabeth's father remained distant, a man more interested in estates and politics than his daughter's development. He nurtured in her a suspicion of outsiders, a fatalism about the burdens nobles were destined to bear, the seeds of cruelty. The murmurs persisted among servants of a peculiar coldness in the girl as she aged. Elizabeth was methodical and quick to anger when crossed. Childhood games, some whispered, would turn strangely violent. Small animals met unfortunate ends. Yet in her time, harsh discipline and even casual cruelty were commonplace among the aristocracy, a legacy perhaps as damaging as anything in her blood. Events of her preteen years only intensified her isolation. At 11, Elizabeth was betrothed without her consent, as was custom to Ferenc Nadasdy, scion of another powerful interrelated clan. The Nadasdy castle would one day become her domain, but marriage negotiations forced Elizabeth to divide her loyalties between two domineering families, amplifying the sense that her fate was a prize in a dynastic struggle, not her own. 4. Obsession with youth and beauty, O beauty, take of Mozambique. The noble mirror. Courtly Hungary was a society obsessed with appearance. For noble women, youth and beauty were not only personal assets, but strategic tools, a form of soft power wielded in a world ruled by men, but petty enough for envy and sabotage. Elizabeth was strikingly attractive by contemporary accounts, tall, with sharp features, alabaster skin, and intense black eyes. Confidence became her armor, beauty her shield against court intrigue and personal insecurities. But beneath that poise lay an anxiety only the beautiful know, the certainty that time itself is an enemy. Customs and superstitions grew around female beauty. Noble women sought salves and ointments, drank herbal concoctions, slept with slices of raw pork on their faces to keep the skin supple. Grooms courted women, not just for their estates, but their complexions. Wrinkles, age spots, any evidence of decay, these were social failures as much as biological realities. Elizabeth, with her privileged genetics and learned obsession, came to embody this fear taken to its furthest extreme. Her servants learned to dread her scrutiny. The smallest blemish, the faintest flaw, could elicit fury or punishment. Superstition and ritual. The Hungarian countryside was thick with folk legends. Old women whispered of witches who could steal beauty. There was talk of fountains that granted wishes for eternal youth, of rare herbs that might reverse mortality. In such an atmosphere, the leap from folk remedy to dark experiment was terrifyingly small. No one can say when Elizabeth first began to believe in the rejuvenating powers of blood. Perhaps she overheard a peasant tale, or perhaps the idea grew like rot, hidden and inexorable, in her mind as she watched herself slowly change in the mirror. 5. The murders. Horror behind castle walls. Privilege unchecked. As the new mistress of Castle Cocteau, a brooding fortress on a limestone ridge, Elizabeth inherited immense independence. Her husband Ferenc was often away leading campaigns against the Ottomans, leaving Elizabeth in charge of vast estates and hundreds of servants. She acquired the right, rare for women even of her class, to administer justice across her lands, including the power of torture. At first, discipline toward her female servants seemed harsh, but not exceptional, yet isolated by status and increasingly tormented by her own anxieties. Elizabeth escalated her cruelty to a level both systematic and sadistic. Servants who displeased her were stripped, beaten, starved, burned, and mutilated. Some survived, others simply vanished. Years later, testimony would claim that Elizabeth was driven to extremes by a single incident. A maid combing her hair pulled too hard, causing Elizabeth to strike her so viciously that blood spattered on her hand. According to legend, she noticed her skin appeared rejuvenated where the blood had landed, a moment that metastasized into obsession. Whether or not this account is true, it symbolized her lethal rationale. Beauty and youth preserved at any price. Peasant girls, lured from nearby villages, promised work, food, or shelter, became victims, their disappearances explained away by poverty, plague, or the dangerous political climate. The torture chambers. Elizabeth's cadre of trusted servants became both accomplices and witnesses. They constructed hidden rooms, false walls, and secret cellars. It was here, in the darkest corners of Cocteau, that the ritualized killings occurred. Acts of unimaginable cruelty shrouded by the stone and secrecy afforded only to the highborn. Survivors' statements and later legends described a catalog of horrors. Young women bled to death from hundreds of wounds, bodies mutilated and discarded, experiments in the naive quest for agelessness that bordered on the occult. The number of victims remains fiercely debated. Some say dozens, some hundreds, even up to 600. The real tally, lost to time, is certainly ghastly. Elizabeth herself, transformed by years of unchecked power, believed herself untouchable. Her noble status gave her latitude, while fear kept her household silent. Letters indicate that she eventually ran short of peasant girls and began targeting daughters of minor nobility, a fatal error. 6. Court intrigue and the fall. Enemies at the gate. For years, rumors swirled about the Countess's atrocities. Local clergy and minor nobility complained, but were ignored or silenced. No one wished to risk the wrath of one of Hungary's leading families, nor upend a powerful alliance by exposing its secrets. But by 1610, the number of missing girls had become impossible to ignore. Parents of noble daughters began to demand answers. The local bishop, emboldened by the whispers, implored the Habsburg king Matthias II to intervene. Political rivalries flourished alongside the scandal. Elizabeth's vast wealth was tempting to her kin and dangerous to her enemies. A formal investigation was finally launched, led by György Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, a relative by marriage, but an ambitious man less interested in family loyalty than political gain. The investigation and trial. In December 1610, Thurzo's men raided Castle Cadiz. According to legend, they caught Elizabeth in the act, her hands bloodied, a dying girl at her feet. The aftermath revealed rooms littered with corpses, starving prisoners, torture devices, and notebooks in which Elizabeth allegedly recorded the names of her hundreds of victims. Elizabeth's closest servants were interrogated under torture. Their confessions shocked even hardened officials. The tales of mutilation, deprivation, and ceremonial bloodletting seemed so monstrous that some wondered if they weren't exaggerated by pain or fear. Elizabeth herself was never put on trial. Her rank shielded her from direct prosecution. Instead, her accomplices were executed, and she was condemned to lifelong house arrest, bricked into a set of rooms within her castle. She died a few years later in 1614, discredited, unmourned, a living specter in her own tomb. 7. The science and psychology behind the atrocity. Genetic shadows and madness. Modern scholars still debate the true degree of Elizabeth's inbreeding and its effects. There's strong evidence her family's pattern of consanguinity contributed to her neurological problems, epilepsy, migraines, and perhaps personality disorders. Historians and forensic psychologists suspect she may have suffered from sadistic personality disorder, narcissism, or other psychiatric conditions, compounded by isolation and absolute power. It's now understood that repeated inbreeding increases the risk of inheriting deleterious traits, mental illness, epilepsy, and even sociopathic tendencies. The Bathory case, like those of the Habsburgs and Romanovs, serves as a grim demonstration of how dynastic ambitions can inadvertently incubate pathology. The role of power, yet blood alone does not explain everything. Elizabeth lived in a violent, superstitious era where the suffering of the powerless often went unremarked. Her position as a woman in power, a rarity at her level, meant her authority was envied, even resented, by men within her own family and rival courts. Patriarchal prejudice and political calculation likely amplified the tales of her crimes, even as her documented atrocities need no exaggeration to shock modern readers. 8. Legacy, myth, legend, and cultural echoes. History or horror story. After her death, Elizabeth Bathory's life was transformed into legend. She became inspiration for vampire lore, Gothic novels, horror films, and countless retellings. The Blood Countess is alternately a cautionary tale about female ambition, a proto-feminist victim of misogynist enemies, or the world's first female serial killer. Yet, there is no denying that she presided over systematic murder on a scale extraordinary in any era. Whether she bathed in blood is likely legend, a ghastly metaphor for both beauty obsession and the price of inbreeding. Enduring lessons, Elizabeth's fate urges reflection on the dangerous intersection of unchecked privilege, brittle vanity, and ignorance, both scientific and moral. Her story is not just about one monstrous woman, but about a culture that allowed and even enabled her crimes. It is about the cost of treating people as property, of failing to question those at the top, and of refusing to admit the limits of one's own knowledge. The legacy of the Blood Countess, like so many royal nightmares, is a warning still relevant in every age.